On April 15, 1943, at an altitude of 25,000 feet over the Belgian shoreline, Oberleutnant Hermann Keller from Jagdgeschwader 26 observed strange outlines advancing from the west, enormous single-engine interceptors that bore no resemblance to anything listed in his identification manuals. The account in his after-action log, now housed in the Bundesarchives military records, marks the initial clash between German aviators and Republic P-47 Thunderbolts in battle. These robust interceptors were closing in at heights once thought unattainable for U.S. planes. He approximated there were about 12 of them, holding tight formation beyond 7,000 meters. The spectacle that unfolded before Keller's eyes would linger as a nightmare for Luftwaffe aviators until the war's end. The foremost U.S. interceptor abruptly unleashed what looked like an unrelenting barrage of cannon fire. This wasn't the typical salvo from 4 or 6 weapons, but instead 8 coordinated barrages of large-bore projectiles, forming a focused web of devastation foreign to German tactical principles. His comrade's Focke-Wulf FW-190 absorbed roughly 40 strikes in less than 2 seconds. Rather than bursting into flames or detonating, the plane just disintegrated, reduced to scraps of aluminum foil by the relentless pounding of 50-caliber, armor-piercing incendiary bullets. Major Donald Blakesley from the 4th Fighter Group had just claimed the P-47's inaugural air-to-air kill, unveiling to the Luftwaffe the U.S. doctrine of overwhelming ordnance. The Republic P-47C Thunderbolts mounted 8 Browning M2 50-caliber machine guns, each capable of unleashing 800 rounds every minute. Combined, this arsenal unleashed 6,400 rounds per minute, more than 100 projectiles each second. Loaded with 350 rounds per gun, a P-47 could sustain this ferocious onslaught for almost 33 seconds of continuous firing. The very calculus of dogfighting had shifted irrevocably. This innovation signaled a profound clash of engineering mindsets. The Luftwaffe had launched into the conflict certain that cannon armament signaled progress. Their go-to fighter armament, the 20-metered MG-121-20, launched bursting shells capable of wrecking a plane with just a few impacts. German flyers drilled rigorously in leading shots. They took pride in their accuracy, relying on 1 or 2 expertly aimed cannon rounds to dispatch a foe. Major Gunther Rahl, who later amassed 275 kills to rank as the 3rd leading ace ever, shared the German viewpoint in a post-war discussion. "We saw machine guns as outdated relics. Cannons embodied the next step in fighter weaponry. A proficient aviator required only pinpoint delivery of explosive projectiles. This was dogfighting elevated to a precise craft, the U.S. Strategy embodied mass-production combat thinking transposed to the skies. Instead of banking on a pilot's sharpshooting for exact strikes, the P-47's octet of guns generated a blanket of fire. At standard engagement distances of 200 to 300 yards, the convergence area formed a lethal rectangle about 8 feet by 12 feet, a zone where survival was impossible for any plane. Colonel Robert S. Johnson, who racked up 27 triumphs flying P-47s with the 56th Fighter Group, outlined the American mindset. "Our goal wasn't pinpoint precision like surgery. We unleashed superior force. Each burst was crafted to ensure annihilation via sheer quantity over finesse." The numbers underscored the gulf in armament approaches. A P-47 Thunderbolt toted 2,800 rounds overall, 350 per gun from 8 barrels. Every armor-piercing incendiary projectile tipped the scales at 1.71 ounces. During a standard 15-second volley, a P-47 could hurl more than 1,600 rounds, equating to 171 pounds of metal and incendiary material. In contrast, a Bf-109G held 150 rounds for its lone 20mm cannon, plus 300 rounds apiece for 2 13mm machine guns. The gap in prolonged firepower stood out even more starkly. A German interceptor could sustain cannon bursts for only about 6 to 7 seconds before depleting its stores. A P-47, however, could unleash repeated hammerings across a skirmish, with reserves sufficient for several bouts. The debut large-scale showdown between P-47s and German interceptors had unfolded earlier, on March 10, 1943, as the 4th Fighter Group undertook the model's first operational sortie over France. Yet that outing proved a total flop owing to radio failures, with every plane heading back to base sans contact with adversaries. The Germans stayed oblivious to the peril they'd just sidestepped. What the German pilots failed to foresee was the P-47's tailoring for dominance at great heights. Its enormous Pratt & Whitney R2800 double WASP power plant, equipped with an advanced turbo supercharger setup, generated 2,300 horsepower in thin air where German motors faltered. Up at 25,000 feet, the domain of BF formations, the P-47 delivered speeds and handling that outpaced its foes. Luftwaffe tactics had prioritized fights under 20,000 feet, where their machines excelled. Even the Bf-109G's Daimler-Benz DB605 engine, boosted by MW50 methanol water mix, labored to hold output at lofty elevations. The Focke-Wulf FW-190A, deadly in mid-level skies, grew lethargic above 22,000 feet. Major Egon Meyer, leader of JG-2 and recognized for pioneering the frontal assault on bomber groups, noted in his combat evaluation. Over 7,500 meters, the edge turns entirely to the Thunderbolts. They handle turns effortlessly as we wrestle with stiff controls. They strike downward without fear, unleashing their devastating armament and soar away to security before we can mount a proper defense. By the summer of 1943, the output from Republic Aviation left German spies reeling once precise data arrived in Berlin. The plant in Farmingdale, combined with a fresh site in Evansville, Indiana, hit output levels that defied belief. At its height, Republic churned out 840 P-47s each month, or 28 planes per day. The Evansville site alone ultimately assembled 6,242 Thunderbolts. In contrast, Germany's total fighter manufacturing topped out at 207 units monthly in September 1944, divided among various models. Republic's focus on one design alone approached half of the Reich's overall fighter production. This one U.S. firm was basically rivaling the entire German fighter-building effort. Obus Isef Priller Gard Commodora of JG-26 at first brushed off reports of U.S. manufacturing as defeatist nonsense. But after clashing with ever larger P-47 swarms throughout 1943, he dug up those documents and added his own notes. In fact, these estimates seem understated. We're up against factory-driven conflict on a magnitude beyond our wildest expectations. The gap in output went further than just quantities. Assembling each P-47 demanded 17 and 81 separate components, put together via streamlined assembly lines. The 8 Browning M2 guns by themselves cost more than plenty of full German fighters. Still, the U.S. produced 15,186 P-47s across the conflict, ranking it among the top-built American pursuit planes. On August 17, 1943, the initial Schweinfurt mission gave German aviators a stark showcase of P-47 prowess. Thunderbolts for the first time shadowed B-17s far into Reich territory thanks to drop tanks. JG-1 and JG-26, anticipating undefended bombers once the escorts peeled off at their standard distance, instead confronted 240 P-47s sticking tight to the formation. The fierce clash featured P-47 barrages shredding German ranks. Hamann Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland of JG-26 observed, "The Thunderbolts' weapons don't just harm planes, they obliterate them. We saw veteran airmen disappear in bursts of wreckage. No shot at parachuting, no hope of enduring, just swift annihilation from focused volleys." The mental toll hit right away. German flyers who had honed precise methods for tangling with Allied pursuits now confronted a foe that rendered old dogfight strategies useless. Rather than jockeying for angle, P-47 crews could merely aim their birds at threats and wipe them out via overwhelming gunpower. P-47 operators soon refined approaches to exploit their strengths. The deadliest involved a high-level pounce, plunging from 30,000 feet at nearly 500 meters, unleashing tight salvos, then leveraging speed to pull up again. Germans dubbed these strikes "death from the skies" since they lacked any solid reply. The physics of speed retention heavily tilted toward the P-47. A dive from 30,000 feet down to 15,000 feet built enough momentum for a return climb to 25,000 feet on partial throttle. Early on, German pursuits straining to hit those heights couldn't compete in this vertical arena. The P-47's heft, once viewed as a drawback, proved a boon in such descents. Weighing 14,000 pounds loaded, the Thunderbolts sped up in plummets quicker than any Axis rival. Luftwaffe pilots trying to flee by nosediving discovered P-47s closing in effortlessly, hammering them with lethal fire on the chase. Beyond counts, the P-47's ammo supply acted as a morale booster. Packing 350 rounds per gun, U.S. pilots enjoyed options their foes couldn't fathom. They loosed test shots, adjusted aim onto marks, and tackled several adversaries per sortie. German aviators, limited to 150-200 shells for their main gun, flew gripped by ammo worries. Each trigger pull demanded deliberation. A miss squandered vital supplies. This ammo imbalance bred a core mismatch in battle mindset. Americans battled from plenty, while Germans scraped from shortage. The figures fueling this chasm were jaw-dropping. The Lake City Ordnance Plant in Missouri cranked out roughly 6.5 billion .50 caliber rounds over the war. That one site's yield could hypothetically arm every P-47 produced with more than 400,000 rounds, over 140 full loads per machine. D-Day on June 6, 1944, offered the supreme proof of P-47 supremacy. The Luftwaffe managed only throughout the day of D-Day. American aircraft conducted 319 missions above Normandy. Just the 9th Air Force dispatched more than 2,000 P-47 sorties. Incoming German aviators over the landing zones ran into impenetrable barriers of U.S. fighters that seemed beyond belief. The numbers were overwhelming. Luftwaffe pilots confronted ratios worse than 20-1. Whenever they clashed, they faced intense barrages that rendered classic aerial duels unfeasible. On that day, the Luftwaffe suffered the loss of 35 planes. P-47s were credited with downing 27 of them. The missions targeting ground forces brought extra devastation to German forces. Thunderbolts loaded with explosives and missiles crippled reinforcements heading toward Normandy. Yet the terror stemmed especially from the strafing runs using those 8 cannons. One P-47 could wipe out a whole line of vehicles in a single sweep, its focused blasts piercing plating, wrecking motors, and wiping out operators with brutal precision. By the end of 1944, the Luftwaffe grappled with a dire, multifaceted emergency. Fresh pilots joined frontline squadrons with merely 10 hours of fighter time, up against U.S. aces boasting over 200 hours in battle. The gap in technology, paired with disastrous shortages in training, turned fights into slaughters. Novice German flyers, hurled into action with scant readiness, encountered P-47s where the 8-gun setup nullified differences in expertise. Even erratic volleys filled so much sky that impacts were inevitable. Seasoned Luftwaffe trainers noted that whole groups of trainees vanished in their initial clashes with Thunderbolts. The figures exposed the disaster's magnitude. Airmen starting instruction after June 1944 achieved under a 15% chance of enduring 5 sorties. When matched specifically against P-47s, those odds fell beneath 10%. Squadrons got annihilated in one confrontation, then replenished with even greener replacements who lasted even shorter times. Operation Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's unexpected raid on Allied bases on January 1, 1945, highlighted the total shift in control of the skies. Though they gained initial shock value and wrecked many planes on the tarmac, the pullback saw German casualties reach disastrous levels. As the raiders swung back toward base post their dives, they collided with swarms of P-47s launched from bases farther back. Lacking height superiority or ammo for prolonged fights, the Luftwaffe machines were methodically taken apart. P-47s from the 365th Fighter Group, rising from Metz right after the first strikes, intercepted German groups flying low and eradicated full units. That effort claimed 271 Luftwaffe aircraft and 143 pilots dead, blows from which recovery proved impossible. U.S. air battle tolls came to 16 planes. The trade-off ratio surpassed all prior benchmarks, underscoring the utter command of American gunnery strategy. The arrival of Me-262 jets offered just fleeting respite from P-47 supremacy. Jets might speed away from Thunderbolts in straight-line flight, but they stayed exposed amid takeoffs and descents. P-47 crews devised methods of hovering close to jet fields, poised for those weak spots. The 8-gun volley could shatter a jet just like any standard plane once locked in sights. A jet's velocity edge counted for naught if snared near the ground with flaps down. Numerous of Germany's vital jet experts perished to P-47s in such precarious phases, except for Walter Nowotny. He went down to P-51 Mustangs on November 8, 1944, not P-47s, contrary to occasional false accounts. The end-of-war output numbers painted the full picture of U.S. manufacturing might. Republic Aviation built 15,986 P-47s across the conflict. During maximum output, plants churned out 840 units per month. Everyone mounted 8 Browning M2 guns, demanding 125,488 such weapons overall for the fleet. U.S. plants churned out more than 12 billion .50 caliber rounds, sufficient to arm each P-47 with endless ammunition stocks. In contrast, Germany's full fighter output from 1939 to 1945 approximated 33,000 machines of every variety. Persistent ammo deficits left German pilots airborne with incomplete arsenals. Come 1945, fuel scarcity cut sorties to 15-20 minutes, whereas P-47s flew with 2 hours' worth. The ongoing mental toll on Luftwaffe pilots neared a shared breakdown. Medical staff in the force recorded Thunderbolt phobia, automatic reactions to noises echoing 8 synced guns. Survivors of repeated P-47 run-ins displayed effects akin to shell shock from barrages. Seasoned hands crafted complex evasion maneuvers centered on staying alive, not fighting. They targeted only wounded or lone foes, shunned battles over 20,000 feet where P-47s ruled, refused frontal assaults versus 8 guns, and broke off at once when Thunderbolts showed up. These weren't tactics. The fight wasn't merely about triumphs, it was a desperate bid for existence. Major Garal, who emerged from the conflict with 275 kills, offered vital accounts of confronting P-47s during an assault on May 12, 1944, by P-47s from the 56th Fighter Group under Hub Zanka's command. He suffered the loss of his left thumb. In interviews after the war, R remarked, "The P-47 held superior velocity at high elevations and plunged far quicker than the Bf-109. We came to revere not only the plane itself, but the aggressive armament approach it embodied." General Adolf Galland, boasting 104 victories, detailed in his autobiography the mental toll it exacted. The P-47's octet of machine guns signaled that the U.S. would prevail via sheer abundance rather than precision. Each salvo conveyed, "Our resources are vast enough to squander them, obliterating you." That sentiment proved more crippling than the actual havoc wrought. Johannes Steinhoff, who lived on to lead in NATO with 176 successes, also grasped the fundamental change. While direct citations on P-47s remain absent from accessible records, his roles in JG-6, JG-77, and JG-7 ensured prolonged encounters with U.S. aerial dominance tactics. Outside of dogfights, the P-47's role in close support missions inflicted distinct horrors on German troops below. Those same 8 weapons that tore apart planes wreaked similar ruin on transports, rail lines, and soldier clusters. One P-47 could cripple a train engine in a single sweep. Its focused barrage pierced boiler armor that shrugged off heavier shells. Soldiers toughened by prolonged clashes with Soviet forces on the Eastern Front crumbled amid P-47 strafing runs. The unique thunder of all 8 guns blazing together turned into the audible harbinger of doom. Convoys ambushed by P-47s dissolved from cohesive formations into smoldering debris trails spanning miles. Come early 1945, upgraded P-47M and P-47N models stretched an already unbridgeable divide. The P-47M's Pratt & Whitney R228 power plant delivered 2,800 horsepower via water methanol boost, hitting velocities over 4 mph. Just 130 units of the P-47 were produced, yet they marked the zenith of propeller-driven fighter evolution. The K-14 gyroscopic sight, fitted on later P-47 versions, nullified Germany's final edge in lead anticipation marksmanship. This device computed aiming adjustments for distance and target motion on its own. Paired with the 8-gun setup, it turned even inexperienced aviators into lethal shooters. By late 1944, Germany's acute shortage of aviation fuel compounded the disaster against P-47s. Luftwaffe airmen, limited to scant practice hours, squared off against Yanks with vast accumulated flying time. This gap in proficiency, fused with tech disparities, turned clashes into lopsided routs rather than true battles. German flyers constantly fretted over fuel reserves, pondering if they could mix it up and make it home. P-47 crews, flush with plentiful gas, could bide their time, adjust heights freely, and chase foes relentlessly. Such fuel imbalances forced Germans into reactive postures, while Americans dictated the action from start to finish in skirmishes. The conflict's close revealed the P-47's toll in hard numbers. Across Europe's skies, P-47s tallied 3,952 aerial kills, wrecked or harmed 86,000 rail cars, demolished 9,000 engines, took out 68,000 trucks, and claimed 6,000 tanks. In return, around 3,499 P-47s fell to every sort of threat, including Th-20 from hostile planes and 24,479 from anti-aircraft fire plus accidents. The kill-loss ratio in the air topped 4:1, underscoring unmistakable dominance. The depth of German mental scars from P-47 surfaced anew in the Korean War, as Western German experts advised NATO. Upon viewing clips of F-84 Thunderjets in attack runs, multiple ex-pilots displayed anxiety reactions, revealing enduring scars from the conflict. Those German consultants urged NATO strategists that the U.S. barrage strategy, brute overload over accuracy, had shattered morale profoundly. They warned that potential foes must realize America avoids even contests, opting instead for factory-scale eradication of threats. In April 1945, the Luftwaffe's last operational review conceded total capitulation to American mass production might. It observed that classic air duels relying on flyer expertise and agility had been rendered irrelevant by torrent-like armament. The P-47's 8 guns didn't simply down enemy birds, they dismantled a whole doctrine of warfare. German aviators had begun as skyborne warriors, trusting in personal prowess and exactness. They concluded it as converts to the idea that contemporary battles favored powers able to churn out deluges of destructive power. The P-47 Thunderbolt, armed with its 50 caliber guns, served as the tool of that harsh lesson. After-action studies by warfare scholars affirmed the P-47's game-changing role in air battles. Its 8-gun battery stood for far more than raw output. It captured the essence of U.S. manufacturing ethos brought to the fight. Where Germans pursued, Americans emphasized sheer volume and accuracy in their approach, resulting in an unmatched profusion of resources. In examining the aerial campaign, Dr. Williamson Murray observed, the P-47's 8 machine guns leveled the playing field in dogfights. Personal expertise mattered less than manufacturing prowess. Seasoned German experts with countless flight hours ended up on par with inexperienced American rookies amid barrages of 50 caliber rounds. This effect reached deeper than just the pilots themselves, reshaping German strategic principles. The Wehrmacht had led the way in integrated arms tactics. Yet, U.S. manufacturing might, exemplified by the P-47's overabundant armament, proved that output potential outshone clever maneuvers. The backstory of P-47 production highlights the vastness of America's wartime industrial effort. Republic Aviation evolved from a modest outfit churning out just 39 planes in 1939 to cranking out 840 per month by 1944. This one firm's surge outpaced the total expansion of Germany's entire aircraft output. The Evansville facility, erected on barren ground in 1942, reached a workforce of 28,000 at its height, with 40% being women. Many of these employees lacked any background in factory work, yet they built fighters so reliable that breakdowns in battle were virtually unheard of during the conflict. Every P-47 incorporated 305,000 separate rivets, fastened using air-powered tools unavailable in the majority of German plants. Streamlined assembly processes allowed crews to finish key sections in mere hours, tasks that demanded days in rival workshops. Such productivity gains ensured a dominant presence in the skies over Europe. The munitions output backing P-47 missions underscored U.S. supply chain dominance. In addition to the 6.5 billion rounds made at Lake City, Plants in St. Louis, Denver, and Salt Lake City generated billions extra. This surplus eliminated any worries about ammo shortages for P-47 aviators, unlike their German counterparts who constantly fretted over it. U.S. supply networks shipped these rounds globally, guaranteeing that P-47 squadrons always had what they needed. Bases in France got daily ammo shipments that surpassed the monthly allotments for entire German units. Thanks to this edge in logistics, every P-47 mission took off fully loaded, while German planes often departed with incomplete payloads. The American flight instruction system generated a steady flow of skilled P-47 aviators. Come 1944, the country was preparing 100,000 pilots each year through rigorous courses tailored to P-47 handling. These airmen reported to frontline groups with over 200 flying hours total, including more than 50 in their specific model. On the flip side, German instruction dwindled from 250 hours before the war to under 50 by 1944. Scarcity of fuel forced numerous German flyers to unleash their weapons for the first time amid actual fights. This gap in preparation, paired with the P-47's superior guns, turned clashes into one-sided routs instead of fair contests. The P-47's legacy stretched well past wartime figures. Its concept of 8-gun setups shaped U.S. defense strategy clear through the Cold War era. The focus on brute force over finesse ingrained itself in American strategic mindset. German leaders integrating into NATO carried sobering insights from confronting U.S. armament. They stressed how the P-47's octet of guns had shown that contemporary conflict boiled down to industrial muscle. Countries able to churn out massive firepower would overpower those depending on elite fighters' talents. Differences in pilot longevity rates exposed the inherent imbalance in the air battles. U.S. P-47 crewmen finishing their assignments enjoyed about 90% odds of making it through. German interceptor pilots up against P-47s managed under 30% survival odds from 1944 into 1945. This gap stemmed not from variances in bravery or talent, but from the stark math of enduring relentless barrages. Inexperienced German youths, often with fewer than 10 hours in fighters, squared off against battle-hardened Americans boasting hundreds of mission hours in planes packing 8 potent machine guns. Results were dictated by production equations, not personal prowess. The Luftwaffe's experienced cadre didn't just lose, it got methodically wiped out. The P-47's broader role went further than battlefield wins, securing command of European airspace. P-47s shielded the raids that crippled German factories. They guarded strike aircraft that wiped out fuel refineries, sparking the deficits that hobbled Luftwaffe efforts. Even more crucially, P-47s in dive bombing roles disrupted German troop advances. The Wehrmacht couldn't maneuver by day without suffering catastrophic hits from P-47 sweeps, which reshaped campaign options. The Normandy push worked in part because enemy backups couldn't traverse P-47-controlled zones unscathed. After the war, within German armed forces lore, the P-47 stood as the emblem of American resource dominance. Veterans adopted the Thunderbolt mentality to capture the essence of unleashing devastating power. Lessons in military training highlighted that upcoming battles demanded rivaling U.S. manufacturing might beyond mere strategic prowess. Among German forces, the term 8 guns became a concise symbol for unbeatable artillery dominance. Analyses from the Staff College examined how conventional leadership brilliance lost relevance against vast-scale armament barrages. The P-47 instilled in German military experts the realization that contemporary combat hinged on economics, not valor. Luftwaffe aviators were taken aback as P-47 Thunderbolts tore apart their planes using .50 caliber machine guns. Yet this shock revealed a fundamental misjudgment about the essence of today's battles. They approached fights prioritizing excellence over mass, expertise over output, accuracy over deluge. Through harsh lessons, the P-47 showed them that the mass manufacturing prowess of democratic industry outmatched authoritarian precision. Each clash with those 8 guns hammered home a stark reality. The United States had reshaped fighting from personal duels into factory-driven operations. The 15,686 P-47s built, equipped with 125,588 machine guns and billions of ammunition rounds, signified far beyond tactical edge. They reflected a manufacturing ethos that armed each aircraft with double the required armament, since plentiful resources rendered such surplus feasible. German flyers absorbed this insight the most painful way, via constant run-ins with U.S. planes that could annihilate them completely, time and again, with seeming ease. The P-47's 8 guns secured command of European skies. They proved that in an era of mechanized conflict, the country boasting the strongest output potential would inevitably prevail. The astonishment of those German pilots confronting P-47s boiled down to bewilderment at modern combat's core. They had trained for elegant sky nights, only to encounter a mechanized juggernaut that dispatched them via 8 guns unleashing more than 100 rounds every second. Within those merging lines of tracers resided the full narrative of World War II. America's talent for generating superior might and deploying it precisely where required. Those German aviators who endured came to grasp that they had confronted not merely better planes, but a superior approach to production. The P-47 Thunderbolt, armed with its 50-caliber machine guns, stood as democracy's retort to despotism. Not via doctrine, but through the unyielding logic of factory output that bravery or talent alone couldn't defy. Ultimately, the initial shock of the German pilots evolved into clarity. They had confronted the evolution of battle, one that wielded 8 guns to impose U.S. manufacturing dominance in relentless salvos.